So we kind of beefed it up to emphasize that. And and these costs, by the way, include in the design phase, things like the traffic and queuing study that needs to take place, pedestrian study, and also to provide an initial deposit within 30 days of executing the MOU. And that deposit will vary depending on what the project is and what type of work it's going to encompass. And the same thing with our license agreement. Within 30 days of an invoice, NCTD should be paid for any costs. And those would include things like environmental studies, permits, inspection fees, railroad flagging, protection costs, and engineering fees. And this full cost recovery is contained both in the MOU and the license agreement. And one of the things we changed is in the license agreement, it was in the original policy that we had, it was called construction and maintenance agreement, which does kind of encompass what that agreement does, but it's not the proper name for it. So we changed it to license agreement because really we're issuing them a license to use that area. So we changed that, but we also, as I said, on the MOU, the MOU is the first step in enhancement projects. And it's the design phase. And in this, like I said, the costs were paid by the lead agency. And so that we would enter into with the lead agency initially. Then if it proceeds from there, we would enter into a license agreement. And this is once the lead agency has applied for the issuance of a license for NCTD's property and has agreed to follow our rules on the right of way. And it also outlines in more detail the requirements that the policy that we updated didn't have, just because we want the lead agency to know exactly what our expectations are. And so we just beefed it up a bit on construction, maintenance, indemnification, insurance, and we're specific on the insurance requirements of what we want, like general liability and railroad protection insurance and things like that, just not both during and after construction, and also termination and cooperation of defense. So the main changes in both of these sections is allocation of costs and also describing long-term maintenance responsibilities associated with the project. So based on the policy, NCTD expects that the lead agency be responsible for all non-railroad improvements. And that's both in maintenance responsibilities, but also cost, and also for wayside horn systems and pedestrian crossings. So we made that a bit clearer as well. And so those are the main changes for board policy number 18. For board policy number 24, employee drug and alcohol policy, this one we made just one minor change you'll see. It's at the very last page of the policy. And in it, it states that the regulated employee has to report to the DER, which is the designated employer representative, within 48 hours of a DUI charge, driver's license cancellation, driver's license suspension, conviction for DUI or other related offenses, or denial of a driver license issuance or renewal. And this was added voluntarily because we just feel as a public transit agency that safety obviously is our number one priority. And so we want to hold our employees up to the highest public standard possible. So that's why we added that section. And we also updated the contact information for the district's drug and alcohol program administrator and position titles. It's more administrative. Finally, the third substantive policy that we made changes on was board policy number 33, the joint use and development of real property. And the first thing we revised on the objectives and goals is just really to emphasize transit-oriented developments, because that's what we're working towards, but also meeting the community needs through transit connectivity and things, that make both the development and public transportation intertwined. We also updated the joint use and development criteria. And in that, we first of all put down on sustainability. These are things like low flush toilets, native and drought tolerant plants, recycling during construction and operation, LED lighting and things like that, that we would obviously want to be pro-environment and include these in any joint use development. The third change we did, and this one was one that's been important to us because we're finding this in our developments of like the Oceanside Transit Agency. We're entering into these exclusive negotiation agreements, and we realize that we cannot get through the entitlement process in time from what the board policy shows. So right now, how it was written was that it would have to be generally takes 18 months, but could not exceed 30 months. So we have found, particularly in California, where development goes incredibly slow. And in fact, through our outside consultant, CBRE, they advised us that, everything's taking twice as long to get through. And we're not even talking Coastal Commission, we're just talking the regular phases. So one of our proposals in this is to change the time period on that. So now it would be 3 years that we would, but it cannot exceed, it can't exceed 5 years without the CEO's approval. And we think that at least, and that might not even be enough, but at least we have something in there that we can be more reasonable when we're also working on these exclusive negotiation agreements, because when we're drafting it, we're putting it in the time frame of 30 weeks. And so it's just not, it ends up, we'll have to amend it because it's just simply not enough time. Another thing we made to board policy number 33 is we updated the environmental compliance with NEPA. So the previous policy just had CEQA references, and we also updated it with our SOP, which also it was fairly new in this last year, which relates to the CEQA and NEPA compliance, and that's 3000.92 is our SOP on that. Finally, the last change we made to this policy is we provided additional eligibility criteria. So FTA Circular 7050.1C added, they had 4 criteria, and now they added a 5th. And the 5th criteria is fee collection for zero emission vehicle charging. So we added that into the policy as well. So assuming the executive committee authorizes advancement of the proposed modifications, staff will advance to the October regular board meeting on the consent agenda for the full board to consider adoption of a resolution approving the proposed modifications. And if you have any questions, if I can't answer them, we have here that for board policy 18 and 33, we have Tracy Foster, our Chief Development Officer, and Lillian Dorgy, who's our Director of Planning and Development. And for board policy number 24, we have Joy Freeman, the Chief People Officer, and Karen Tucholsky, who's the Chief Safety and Security Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Misty. Would you all like a couple minutes to look at this and form your questions? Would you like to start questions or comments? Okay, Sharon, Lisa? I'm sorry, board member Jenkins.
Yes, on board policy 18, where you talk about the lead agency. So if there's a development going, excuse me, if there's a development happening in a community, would they not be able to work with NCTD directly? Does it have to go through the public agency the particular public agency?
It would, well, it is who we have the MOU with as the lead agency, so whoever that is. So you're talking about a situation where the city has another development that they would like enhancements on, but they're not going to be a party to the
Well, it
MOU.
may be a developer that wants to do some sort of enhancement and it involves NCTD property, let's say. Would that be the city that has to be the lead on that? Or can the developer work directly with NCTD?
The developer can act as lead agency.
Okay, doesn't have
if-
to be a public agency.
It doesn't have, not as defined in our policy.
Okay, that's where my confusion was. Okay, thank you. On 24, where you talked about the new section on page 13 of 16, employees must report. Is that the specific employee reporting about themselves? Or would that also be another employee that maybe knows of something that feels NCDD should be aware of?
Well, as written, it's only the employee that needs a self-report, but we do have, like, people can obviously submit, which we do get internal things from us, from employees, alerting us to situations. So we would still look into that if we found it. It's just, but as in terms of just this provision, it's the
Itself.
employee that has to self-report.
Okay. And then on 33, where you talked about the entitlement, I'm glad you clarified that it needs to be more years, because sometimes some of these developments take decades.
It's insane.
So, and then is there any place in here where, so we're talking about the joint use. Is there any place in here where it talks about where North County Transit, as we move along through however many years that takes to get to that point, reevaluates the financial benefit to North County Transit of the project? Because as you go down the road, projects don't always pencil out how everybody thought they were going to pencil out. And so what happens at some point? We've talked about this quite a bit. What happens at some point if we have a joint project going on and it's very obvious that it doesn't make sense to North County Transit anymore?
Right.
How do we
So we
deal
have,
with that?
yeah, sure. We have in our memorandum of understanding as we go through, and even in the license agreement, that we can terminate. So, oh wait, and this one's board policy 30, yeah, where we're entering into joint development. So in the initial phase under the, where we work in the exclusive negotiation agreement, we are absolutely able to, during times, both parties can terminate if it's not financially feasible. So it's not just us, it's their opportunity as well. And it's kind of during that phase that we determine, we're kind of penciling things out and seeing whether we want to go to the next phase, of the development agreement. So absolutely, it's a factor that we consider. If at the end of the day, if it's not going to be financially beneficial for us, that is a factor that we would look into.
So I'm reading on page 3 of 10, 2E, it looks like it's a new paragraph. Joint development projects should be reasonably viable, which is very subjective, now and in the future. So I would just caution all of us to really watch those in the future, because as we've had discussions, $100,000 or 33,000 or whatever, I don't know that that's viable.
No, and I think that's why, and I agree with you. It is, it's not very firm, but it was purposely done because we didn't though want to completely say that it's a situation where it's close to being viable. We didn't want to just completely eliminate it. But so that's why we did it. But that's why we didn't have the very, language that just said no if it's
Right.
not viable. But
Right.
it is a factor that NCTD is looking at when they're looking at these projects on viability.
Yeah,
all I
if-
have.
if I could just add to that too,
Sure.
and I appreciate what you said. I think sort of what we talked about in the board, maybe when we had a conversation about RDO and Melrose specifically, was I think the agency needs to be more thoughtful about explaining either what the community good out of that is, or if there's things other than just monetary value that we received as a function of that project. And that may go into the, I mean, we use it all the time when we talk about projects or things in transit, sort of the reasonableness of why we do something. And I think that was where that sort of sentence came from. It is sort of vague on purpose. I think it goes back to when we bring it to the board, it allows the board the opportunity to say, we believe that what we're getting from this project is either right for the community, right for the agency, and isn't solely based on the monetary value of whatever we receive annually from that. So I think
Right.
that was sort of the push for adding that in there.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, and that's why I said it is a factor, but there's a lot of factors that go into, these type of projects. Thanks.
Thank you.
And if I may, just a couple of comments on the questions that you posed, Board Member Jenkins. I think on the policy, board policy number 24 for employee drug and alcohol, I think your point is well taken as to, who is required to report. And I think I will propose a modification to that says an employee must report, so that it's clear that it's the employee, right? Or the employer and employee, something like that. I'll make a modification related to that. For board policy number 33, under the financial policy section 3 on page 3 of 10 that you noted, that was added in an effort to address the comments that have been made at the board meetings. And I think perhaps we might want to add in there, should be reasonably viable now and in the future as determined in NCTD's sole discretion. I think we will add that in and make it a little bit more, giving us, the sole discretion as to what is reasonably viable.
I like that idea.
Was they were about to tell?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad Ms. Winfrey just clarified, because I was going to say it sounds like it comes back to the board anyways. So we would have the ability to say yay or nay when a project does come before us, because we can hear from you all how you all feel. And then of course, ultimately the board can decide whether or not they'd want to keep moving forward with it. So yeah, great. Thank you.
Board Member Contreras, any comments or questions?
Thank you. Well, just going on with board policy 33, so reasonably viable. Do you anticipate that when it does come to the board, it will be a list of reasons why it's viable, or how do you imagine that would be presented to the board?
Yeah, it absolutely should be. I think anytime we bring a project of that magnitude, and RDO and Melrose were a little bit unique because I think our focus was largely on affordable housing. So I think when we sort of pick what that is, when we manage those transactions, we have to come to the board with a very specific list of, here's the monetary value to the organization. Here are sort of the non-monetary pieces that are embedded in the project that will help NCTD. And here's the community aspect of the project that will yield either services or resources to the community that we're doing the project in. So we can kind of spell those out so that if the board has concerns over those, or wants an explanation on any of it, it's right there. We don't have to dig into it. We need to bring those every time we bring project forward.
Yeah, I think that would be just a really good practice moving forward. I'm glad that Board Member Jenkins, alerted this to the board when we were talking about that project, because I think the monetary value was like $27,000 a year or something very, very small. But if we're going to have a holistic view of why this project is going to be beneficial to the agency, showing that it does integrate, more of the transit amenities and connects the transit corridors. I had a question that Melrose project specifically because of the 318 bus, so I think it's just good information and provides that more well-rounded picture of what the development is beyond just the structure of it and how much money, right? Yeah, because then the board can have that more information to see exactly how it's gonna impact us. Yeah, sure.
Just, it sounds like and I'd love to hear from you all. It would be something similar to where we have criteria, I know for our CIPs that we have to meet in order for those to have prioritization. There'd be like a similar process for these projects as they come before us, so that we're seeing basically how they'd map out as, yeah, okay. So it would be similar in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because that conversation came up at some of the low sand meetings about, we're having very specific conversations about alternatives and not specific conversations about how it impacts a community or what the community benefits are. Without those, it lacks really a lot of context in terms of what we're trying to accomplish from a project perspective.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, and I appreciate those comments. I think it really puts us in a different direction so that we can have those community conversations, because all of our cities at some point are probably going to have some kind of interface with NCTD in a project, hopefully. So okay, that's great. I look forward to seeing that. And I do have a question. I think this might be housed under Board Policy 18. But one of the things in my city, and also I've seen it in other cities, but in particular along the Sprinter corridor in NCTD's right of way, is a lot of graffiti. And one of the issues can be, being able to abate it, and what kind of who is eligible to even enter the right of way. So and I just don't know how to translate what I read for Board Policy 18 to understand, is there like a seamless way for folks that want to abate the graffiti that's on our public right of way? And like, is there a good process for that? Because I know that in my city, people have ran into that issue, and it makes it very difficult.
Yeah, I think there is. We had a conversation with Escondido about that, actually, because some of where the track line is in Escondido, like the foul zone is literally, it's right there. So people are trespassing on the property to put the graffiti there. And then we're not really able to let community groups or someone come in and do those things unless they're being escorted or unless they've gone through right-of-way training. And so we're trying to, I think when those are identified to us through the community, we try to find ways to get them out there, or find off times when we're not running, or find ways to get into that zone to be able to remove the graffiti. It's been fairly successful in Escondido. If there are other cities that are experiencing that, let us know. I know the facilities team tries to get out and manage those as quickly as possible. One thing we found out in Escondido pretty quickly was when we were able to get most of it in one shot, it sort of came back very slowly, and we were able to go and address them. And then some places they sort of just disappeared altogether. So however we can help solve that problem, we want to make sure we get in and do that. There's a little bit sometimes of a permitting process that goes around with that. It depends on what exactly it is we're trying to do inside the right of way. Sometimes we can help out with that if it's not a super big deal. We want to try to make it as easy as possible for the cities to get out and take care of that, because we know that once that happens there, it's just going to spread down, and we don't want that. So
okay. And I do appreciate your point about being able to abate the graffiti as quickly as possible. And I've seen that in our city, that it is a little bit slower to come back, but we do have some really hot spots. And I think art could be a good way to try and mitigate that. But so would you say that in our individual cities, maybe we have to have a better process because it's not always cities that are coming to NCTD, it would be the property owner, right? And so that's where I'm just not sure if we have a good, if it's like in customer service, or where that interface happens with NCTD to try to navigate how to get on the property to mitigate the graffiti.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We probably need to tighten that down a little bit, because typically what happens is one of us will get a call from an elected official, and we'll have someone go take care of that. A business may contact customer service. Someone may contact a former contact that they had that helped them solve that problem. And you're right, there's a lot of different community groups, right? There's businesses, and then there's property owners, and there's the city itself. So we probably need to find a way to streamline that process to make sure that there's one spot where people can go to make that request. It may not curve all the time. People call us
Right.
directly and saying, hey, can you help me out? And there may be legitimate reasons why they may have an event that weekend, or we need to help them with
Mhm.
something, and we want to be available for that. But yeah, we'll
Okay,
Definitely
yeah, I
work on
look
that.
forward to having that conversation, and maybe it's, like just a simple help button on the website. I don't
Yeah.
know, right? But yeah, I've just heard some issues with it, and I know it's not that we're, trying to be difficult. It's that the right of way is an extremely dangerous place.
And I know the real estate group deals with that a lot
Yeah.
on working with them when there is graffiti and helping them navigate through the permit process as well.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so
And-
much.
And on that point, I was just going to say, I know that we have had MOUs with the county, for example, in the past where they contributed to the abatement program financially. But because we have, better resources in terms of, safety and so forth, they can access the right of way and do the cleaning. And I know that we have had an MOU with the county at one point, and I think we would welcome, anything like that with the cities, as well,
For
or
sure.
other groups that are interested in, working toward abatement. from a-
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. I look forward to following up.
Good comments and questions. I definitely mirror those of my colleagues, and thank you for doing the deep dive. So there were a couple of things that I noticed that were not having to do with these substantive changes. Board policy 1 on the second page under procedure has chief executive director. So I think that there needs to be just some hunt and peck and, identify that sort of stuff. And there were a number of places on my computer, but I have an Apple, so things may have slid, where there were spaces missing and, things like that. So hopefully by the time it gets to the board, all of those little nitpicky things will be taken care of as well.
Yeah, the admin will come in and clean everything up and make it look pretty.
All right. But I'm going chief executive director. That sounds like a
I don't
common
know.
job. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Misty.
Thank
Any
you.
more questions or comments for Misty? No.
Appreciate
really
it.
Appreciate it. And there's no vote required on this. It is purely an update for us. So it's scheduled to move to the board in October. So we'll be seeing this again soon. If you want to take it home and continue to work on it, I think that that's something that's allowed, correct? Because it's pretty in our face today. Thank you. And I know the limitations were there for staff to get this out the door. So thank you very much. All right. Well, at this point, our next scheduled meeting is the regular board meeting on Thursday, October 17th at 2 p.m. Here at NCTD headquarters, 810 Mission Avenue in Oceanside. And this meeting is adjourned.